Romans is a different book. It's a different kind of letter. It's not like the other epistles. It's a book that, in different times of history, has been very important to different people. It was very important to the reformers. It's a book that lays out the gospel, the good news that brings great joy. So why is it different? We went through a couple of those reasons last week. One being that it's written by Paul, and it's written to a church that he didn't plant. Usually when Paul writes a letter to a church, he'll lay out this list of issues that church is having. He'll lay out this list of problems that they're dealing with. When he writes to the church in Corinth, it's another long letter like the letter of Romans. But you're not going to find him having time to just lay out what the gospel is and our condition, because he has to lay out a list of issues of, you're still doing this? You're doing this? One of you wrote me and told me that you're doing this? I know that you over there are still doing this, and I heard about that. And he has to go on, and he has to take care of issues. Sometimes when he writes an epistle, he has to answer questions. Most frequently, he'll end his epistles with explaining how to live the Christian life, which is important. And all those things are good. You'll notice that on your study guides today, or as Brett said last week, or on the screen, that we have this quote, the greatest letter ever written. And that's a quote that I always have a hard time saying, because I don't like to try to downplay anything else in the Word of God. But we're not doing that. But we are exalting one specific book and saying that this letter is so saturated with the gospel. It's so saturated with the good news. That is maybe the greatest letter ever written. It's up there with all the other ones in Scripture. As we dive into this today, I want to present a challenge to you before. And this is the challenge. Is the gospel of Jesus Christ power in your life? So as we go today, come with me. Let's start in verse 18, and we're going to come back to verse 16 and 17. If your Bible has a header, it has a topic line, mine does. Mine over verse 18 is this really great topic line. It's one that just gets you excited that, man, I can't wait to read these verses. God's wrath on unrighteousness. Oh, wait. Verse 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. So what is God's wrath revealed against? Ungodliness and unrighteousness. And whose ungodliness and unrighteousness? Men. One thing you'll see that's really common in the world, that people who claim to serve God, people who have no problem claiming that they don't serve God, is that they will say that they hate evil. They will say they hate injustice. They will say they hate wickedness. That is the easiest stance to take. No one takes the stance of, yeah, I'm unrighteous, I'm ungodly, I'm evil. No one takes that stance. Even the evil don't take that stance. But let me tell you, God is not simply taking a stance if he doesn't like evil, that he's just indifferent towards wickedness, that he's going to just let ungodliness happen, but he doesn't really like what he's seeing, is that his wrath is boiling towards it, that his justice is being held back by Jesus currently, and it's going to come down on its head. And why do I say it like that? Because men do not want you to think that way. They want to suppress the truth. They want to suppress the truth and tell you that you can just live however you want, you can do whatever you want, and that's okay. They want to suppress the truth and tell you that God doesn't care that much about wickedness of the world. I was speaking with someone the other day, and I was actually inviting them to my community group, and I was telling them, and they said, well, I want to come, but my husband doesn't believe in God. I said, well, that's fine. He could absolutely still come, and I would love to sit down with your husband and talk with him. He said, well, the thing is, he looks out in the world, and he sees that bad things happen to good people, and he just can't see how a God could exist if that was true. So I said, can I present to you a few things? First is I want to tell you a really good R.C. Sproul's quote, which is that, to paraphrase, you say that good things happen to bad people, but that only happened once, and he volunteered, and that was Jesus Christ. 2, you say that you see suffering in the world, and that God must not care about it. And as Tim Keller laid out at the Vertigras Forum, it may be cold comfort, but we know God's not indifferent to suffering, or else he wouldn't have come down and suffered for us. He wouldn't have taken a much worse suffering than you will ever take upon himself. He wouldn't have taken an eternity of hell on the cross. He wouldn't have taken the wrath of God laid out on top of him, on his shoulders to bear as his hands were pierced, if he was indifferent about suffering. And as I told her this, she started to say, you know what, maybe we'll come to community group sometime. But what it is her husband, the people in her life, are trying to suppress the truth by looking at God and saying, he doesn't care that much about suffering. He doesn't care that much about injustice. He doesn't care that much about wickedness. That's not true. It boils up his wrath. He is not going to let it stand forever. And the most common place he sees it, the only place he sees it, is in men. So I started to talk more with them, and I asked him, what do you see when you look out into the world? Do you see that everything is just okay? How far outside of the walls of Ekklesia do you have to go to see that things are not as they should be? Well, you don't even have to leave the walls, because if you look around you, you know that there's broken people in here. Even those who belong to Jesus now were once broken. You don't have to look far. Do I have to turn the news on to know that people are out there suffering? Do I have to know that it's mostly being imposed by other men making them suffer, the unrighteous and the ungodly? I don't have to go far. I was on Facebook the other day, which is, I don't know, social media is a cesspool, so this isn't really a surprise. But I was on social media the other day, and I saw this post that said something along the lines of, hey, I'm not forcing you to get a tattoo. I'm not forcing you to not listen to my music. I'm not forcing you to abort a baby. I'm not forcing you to so-and-so and so. And it was the most blatant example I saw of suppressing the truth this week, of how a corrupt mind would say, hey, Nate, I don't force you to get tattoos. Don't force me not to murder a child. That you would equate those two things. Whether or not someone is telling you not to get a tattoo, that you would look at those two things. I don't have to go far to find what ungodliness is doing to suppress the truth. We live in a time where truth is incredibly valuable. We live in a time where it's a big topic right now among all those who, whether they belong to Jesus or not. We have a big thing right now called, if you've heard the phrase, fake news. That truth, even the truth that we hear from what should be trusted sources, maybe isn't trustworthy. That men are even suppressing the truth in things that don't matter. I want to go to social media one more time. Have you ever gotten social media and everyone has that 60-year-old aunt that shares things that clearly aren't true? I'll tell you a really funny one I saw recently. So good. So it was a picture, and this picture clearly was just from a biker rally. I don't know what biker rally. It was just a bunch of guys on motorcycles going, maybe 100 of them, and they're all in one group and they're driving down the same road. And someone said, this is the Bikers Against Injustice group or so, some silly name, and they're driving down to the border to help build the wall. And I'm not saying that maybe there's not bikers out there who have that feelings on that. And I'm not saying what my political opinion is on that. But what I am saying is that post was so clearly fake that this person can't decipher what they're looking at and have any kind of ability to say, you know what, this might not actually be real, and maybe I shouldn't share this for everyone to see. that truth is at a premium right now. You've probably been taught your whole life that if someone has a picture of something, that's evidence. That is proof that that happened. But I would challenge you that historians would say that the oral tradition that led to the Old Testament being written down is much more verifiable than what Chase Huggins can do to a picture to make you believe it's real. What any graphic designer can do. What I could probably do if you gave me a phone app in 5 minutes. And I'm the least technological savvy person in the room, potentially. The truth is at a premium. People are trying to suppress it. We try to suppress it in our own hearts. Let's move forward. Verse 19. For what can be known about God is plain to them. Plain to who? Who were we just speaking of? The ungodly and the unrighteous. For what can be known about God is plain to them? Because God has shown it to them. Have any of you in here ever heard the name Richard Dawkins? He's an atheistic biologist. He got really famous and became more prominent in the scene when he wrote a book called The God Delusion. It was, a New York Times bestseller kind of book. He wrote this book, and so he started getting interviewed a lot. He started going on, like the talk show circuit. He started going on, podcasts, different videos, just again, interviewed all over the place. And one really famous interview he had was on, I believe it was on 60 Minutes, but I could be wrong about the location. But the interviewer, who's not necessarily a Christian, but trying to be unbiased as he interviews him, asked him, Richard, what are you going to do if you die and you wake up and you're before the judgment seat of God? And Dawkins, real boisterously, he puffs up his chest and says, I will say to God, God, not enough evidence. You didn't make it clear. You cannot hold me guilty. You didn't make it clear. But I want to challenge you today that Scripture proclaims that God has made it clear that men suppress the truth, but they know it's the truth. Verse 20. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. Men aren't ungodly. They aren't unrighteous. They aren't doing wicked things. They aren't corrupt. They aren't evil. Because, they just don't know if there's a God. Maybe it's just not clear. It's clear. Do you remember earlier when I talked about that conversation I had with the woman? And she said, my husband just sees the suffering in the world and he says, I just don't know. Maybe there's not a God because how could bad things happen? The reason you're upset that bad things happen is because you clearly know that they're not supposed to be that way. You know that men are not supposed to be evil. You know that we are not supposed to make each other suffer. Your heart knows that. Andy Bannister always says, and I really love it, I told this to Jake Gibson just the other day, that if someone's arguing with you and says, morals are subjective, maybe they are, maybe they don't exist, maybe there's good, maybe there's evil, just quickly reach in their hand, take their phone from them, and when they ask for it back, say, morals are subjective, you don't need this is mine now. No one believes that. No one lives that way. No one takes the stance that it's just okay to be ungodly and unrighteous, even if they are doing that. What a crummy stance to take. No one wants to be the bad guy. No one wants to look at themselves as the villain. They want to see themselves as the hero. Everyone wants to be the protagonist of their own story. But guess what? That's just you suppressing the truth. That's just men dwelling in their ungodliness, doing everything they can do to ignore the fact that it's abundantly clear in creation. There is a God, and we do not have an excuse. Verse 22, claiming to be wise, they became fools. This is the most common tactic for suppressing the truth in our day and age, and that is to just make the other side look dumb. And it's a good tactic. It's a great one. You don't want to listen to someone? You don't want your friend to listen to someone? Just make them look stupid. Make them look like a child. Make them look like the fool. Claim to be wise. Claim that you know what you're talking about. Speak louder. Oh, wait, I didn't mean to give away that technique. So, claim to be wise. They became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Verse 23 reveals to us the largest way we suppress the truth, and that is with idols. We take good things. We take great things. We take things that are meant to be enjoyed. We take things that are meant to be taken pleasure in, meant to be a large part of our life. People that we should take joy in and rejoice with, and we make them the ultimate thing. And we put them up on a pedestal where God belongs. And we suppress the truth even farther. Because, well, if I can't ignore God, I'll make my own God. I'll make a God that I can control, a God that I can understand, a God that I can put in a box and I can open it up when I need it and I can close it back when I don't need it anymore. Wouldn't that be much easier than having to deal with the truth? Wouldn't it be much easier to have a God that resembled something I understood? And what all of idolatry does, whether it's your family, whether it's sex, whether it's your career, or whatever it is that you want to put up on the pedestal where only God's glory can be, is it makes you God. It gives you something you can control. I can get what I need from this, and if I don't want it anymore, I can let go of it. And it doesn't have to ask anything back of me that I don't want it to ask of me. You're trying to make yourself God. You're trying to make yourself the hero of the story, when it's plain in all of creation that you are the villain. You are not the hero. That your idols, they're created things. Do you know what happens to created things? They wither away and die. And we will die with our idols if we hold on to them. Let's go back to verse 16. So the reason that I would start there is I want you to see our condition. I want you to see how bad off are we? How bad off is our unrighteousness, our ungodliness? How bad off is the world? How much of God's wrath has it incurred? Does it deserve God's wrath? Do men deserve God's wrath? Do I deserve God's wrath? Yes. Yes, 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 and yes till eternity comes. Verse 16 starts with a word that one of the biggest things, I don't know why, maybe I just didn't pay attention in school, but one of the biggest things that Brett Baggett's helped me learn is that if there's a 4, I should go backwards. Verse 16 starts with 4. So let's go backwards. Verse 15. This is how we ended last week. So I am eager to preach the gospel to you also who are in Rome. So he's about to explain, why am I eager to preach the gospel to those who are in Rome? Why am I eager to bring the gospel to Christians? For I, Paul, am not ashamed of the gospel. For it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. What is Paul not ashamed of? He's not ashamed of the gospel that he's been set apart for. Do you remember in the very beginning of last week, where Paul says, I'm an apostle, I'm set apart for the gospel of God. So he brings up the gospel right away. Then he gives somewhat of an explanation from it. And then at the end, he says, I'm eager to come and preach it to you. And then he starts to lay out, well, what is the gospel? Why is he not ashamed of it? How can he stand before the wrath of God and have an answer? How can he not feel the burden of his shame? For it is the power of God for salvation. Who is it the power of God for salvation for? To everyone who believes. Let's stay on that for a second. Paul's purposely trying to get a point to us. He's not just using the word power. It's not a common word that they're going to use to describe the gospel. He's using this word because he wants you to see how strong it is. He wants you to understand that before he lays out in verses 18 through 23 all of our sin, before he lays out our ungodliness and unrighteousness, before he lays out our darkened hearts that are idol factories, that try to do everything they can to suppress the truth, he lays out what is much greater than that. Your heart without Jesus is unfathomably dark. It's pitch black. But Jesus' light is so bright that it will shine through whether you want it to or not. And to that those he calls with his gospel, he is going to clean them up. He has the power to do that. Your sin is no match for Jesus' grace. My sin is no match for the God who calls me out of darkness and transfers me into the kingdom of his light. This power is the only power in the world that matters. What are some powers that matter in your life? In America, we really hold up the power of freedom, which is freedom's a good thing. But we try to take it and make it into an idol. And we try to say things like, you have to be absolutely free in every decision you make, even though that's not true. You can't make any decision that doesn't affect every single person in this room. Have you ever seen The Butterfly Effect? It's a very good movie. It has Ashton Kutcher in it. I promise it's a good movie. In the beginning of the movie, Ashton Kutcher realizes that he has this power that if he can remember something vividly enough, he can go back in time and he can make a change. He can do something to try to change the future by going back in time and changing how something happened. But every time he does it, he finds out that he'll change one thing, but it affects so many other things that he ends up probably making something else worse. Sometimes it's his life. Sometimes it's someone else's life. And he goes to see his father, who he realizes has the same power. He says, how do I fix it? What do I need to do? Every time I go back, I make something worse. It seems like I can't fix everything. That my freedom isn't enough. I have the freedom to change time, but yeah, I always change everyone else's life and make it worse. And his father says, you're trying to play God. And that is absolutely what we do when we think that I have to have so much freedom that there's no way that anyone can infringe on it. There's no way that anyone can do anything about it. That if you want to make a choice that would affect my life, that it's got to be okay with me. That's just suppressing the truth. We all know that's not true. If I walk down the street and accidentally bump into you, I affected your life whether you liked it or not. If I just choose to wear a blue shirt tomorrow, it's going to affect you in some way. Freedom's not God. It's a powerful thing, but it's not as powerful as the gospel. But there's some other powerful things. Is your will powerful? The things that you want to decide to love? What about love? Is it powerful? Have you ever heard anyone say love is enough? Or just choose love? Or you just need to love? You know what my religion is? Love. You know what my spirituality is? Love. When I write my profile down, I was actually filling out a doctor's application the other day. I was seeing a new doctor, and they make you fill out tons of paperwork. And they actually asked for my religion. You know what I wrote down? Love. Love. They said, what church do you go to? I said, Church of Love. No, I didn't say that. The church of love is not powerful enough. And my idea of love is certainly not powerful enough. The only thing powerful enough to deal with my ungodliness, my unrighteousness, the ways I try to suppress the truth, the ways that I would look at creation and say, no, that probably just is by happenstance that we're here. And even if there was a God, he's probably indifferent to us. It's no match for his grace. It's no match for his calling. When he calls you to believe, there's no turning back. His call is without revoke. You belong to Jesus now. And you'll be grateful for it. You'll be so glad. Why is this gospel powerful? Well, one, because it belongs to Jesus. And two, because it's the only good news. Do you remember last week when Brett was going out and explaining what the word gospel meant? And he pointed out that the phrase of the gospel, it's the only good news. It's the only good news that can bring great joy. You know, sometimes I'll be at work and I'll have too much time to myself to think, which is always a bad thing. And I'll be sitting there and I'll start to get depressed and I'll think, working at a bank this doesn't fill me with purpose. That sometimes I think about the concept of money and I just want to throw up. And sometimes people give me money and I put it on a computer that they now have this much and they didn't have this much before, and I just think about how pointless it all is. None of it matters. And the truth is, that's me ignoring the power of the gospel, the only thing that brings purpose. That's me ignoring the fact that if this is true, if this is powerful, it's going to change everything in my life. Read with me verse 17. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith. As it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. This is a phrase that I kind of struggled with when I read through it first, because I feel like if you read through too fast, you're really going to miss what it's saying when it says from faith for faith. Another great thing that makes the gospel powerful is you have no control over it. Your works are not what it's based off of. That it has to proceed from faith for faith. Jesus is not only the beginner of your faith, he's not only the one who grants you faith, he's not only the one who calls you out of darkness, pulls you in, and gives you faith, he's also the one who sustains your faith. He's also the one who gives you the ability to live by faith. Then the next word that's tough with is righteousness. The righteous shall live by faith. Let me tell you what this phrase isn't saying. This isn't saying, you want to know who lives by faith? The righteous, the best of the best, the world's greatest, the saints, the ones that you look at and you just go, man, that guy has got it together. That person, man, he's so sharp. You know how nice Chase is? Chase would give you the shirt off your back. Give me the shirt off your back right now, Chase. Show him. That's not what it means. It means the righteousness that is imputed to you, because when God looks at you, he sees his son and the sacrifice he has made for you. He sees you covered in the blood that has been spilt by Jesus. He sees you not in your sin, but fully saved, justified, now being sanctified, and it's as good as done that it's glorified. He sees you as righteous. Not that you are righteous. Paul made that clear in verses 18 through 23. That Jesus has made you righteous. He's made you as good as righteous because he imputes his righteousness onto you. He lays it on top of you, as if I took my suit jacket off right now and placed it upon someone else and said, look, that is their suit jacket now. He's not just letting you borrow it. He's eternally holding it on to you. That he's forever resurrected. That your righteousness is never again in question because he's never letting it go. You have this eternal advocate who is divine and eternally has a human body, eternally holding up his end of the deal that you're saved. And now I want to come back to that challenge I gave you right at the beginning. And this is where we're going to end today. Is the gospel power in your life? This was the challenge I issued to myself this week. When I stood at work and I think about the purposelessness of what I'm doing, I think about how it doesn't really have an eternal effect. I think about the fact that that's not true, because the gospel is powerful. That even in the things that don't seem important, the little minute details, they're not that minute. That if the gospel is powerful, it's going to infect every area of my life. That it is going to be the blood that pumps through my veins. That there will be no part of my body that doesn't have the gospel flowing through it. And if it does, just like when blood doesn't pump to any part of your body, it's going to be very clear. And I don't say this to stand on a soapbox and say that I have it all together and that I've already figured out that the gospel is powerful. But I say this because I want you to be hit with the same challenge. Is the gospel powerful in your life? Is it good news, or is it just good advice? Is the gospel just an addition to your life? Outside of attending a church on Sundays, outside of the fact that you can write Christian on that doctor's paperwork, what has the gospel changed in your life? Do the people at your work know that you're a Christian? What about your friends and your family? Has it changed the way you interact with them? When you read the righteous shall live by faith, and you see that word live, true life in Jesus, that power that could bring you there because you could never get there on your own, has that changed you? Is the gospel just a good addition to your life? Let me ask you one more question. If you weren't a Christian, what would be different? Would you be working the same job? Living in the same town? Would you have the same friends? How would you treat people? The same? Maybe the gospel isn't power to you. Maybe it's not that great. Maybe you don't see it for what it is. Maybe you're suppressing the truth in your heart. Because if it is power, nothing's the same. Have you ever had a dramatic event happen in your life? Have you lost a loved one? Have you had a bad relationship end? Have you lost a friend? Have you lost a friendship? Have you ever experienced something so painful that things just can't be the same going onward? Have you experienced such great joy that it changed you as a person? Is the gospel the same? Has the gospel done the same thing for your life? Are things never going to be the same? I remember going to Winterfest in Arlington, Texas when I was 16 years old. And I went to this service, and I'm not going to get into the theology of it because it would hurt the story. And frankly, so I go to the service and I have an experience that is so emboldening that afterwards I'm just crying. I'm 16 years old. I probably really embarrassed to cry in public. And I go and I just want to make some phone calls and tell some people, like, my life is different now. Things are changed. They were not. They were not changed. Maybe they were for a week, maybe 2 weeks, maybe a little longer. Maybe I treated people a little different. Maybe I was a little bit happier. Do you know why things weren't changed? Because that experience that I had, where they just turned the air conditioning up, they played the songs a little bit louder, a little bit more spirit, the worship leader got a little bit more into it, started doing that thing where he closes his eyes and gets excited. No, that's just experience. It wasn't that powerful. It didn't have the power to change. I was still left in the dark. It didn't have the power to give me what I needed. It was not strong enough to overcome my sin. It was just a made man experience that even I could take God and make him into an idol in a way that I could take what belongs to him, I could take his church and just make it into something I can control. It's not going to change me. But thankfully, the Lord still had plans that were greater than mine. And he called me. And he did give me his gospel. And he did change me. And he did call me out of darkness. And I belong to him now. And I like that word that Brett really broke down to last week. That I'm not just a servant. I'm not just a bondservant. But now I'm a slave to him. I'm a slave to his righteousness. And if that's true, then I can proclaim boldly, the righteous shall live by faith. And I can know that my faith's in him. Can you do the same? Is the gospel power? Please pray with me. Lord, thank you for your gospel. Thank you for Jesus. Thank you for your Son who you find pleasure in. Thank you for your Son who you look at and he has lived a perfect life. He has died a sinner's death. And he has rose eternally, forever advocating for us. Thank you for a gospel that is powerful because he is powerful. Thank you for a gospel that, if it's true, nothing will ever be the same. Thank you for people who you're going to change. Thank you for people who you call out of darkness. Thank you for people that the gospel is not just the ABCs, but the A through Z of our faith. That from faith, for faith, that we can rest on Jesus. That he has done the work, that his life is the accomplishment. And in this gospel, in this power that saves us, let us be reminded of what we're being saved to. That we're not being saved just to a local body. We're not being saved just to be clean and reset at 0, but we're being saved to your Son. We're not just looking forward to dying and going to a place with golden brick roads, but we're looking forward to being even more in the presence of your Son. The prize isn't heaven. The prize is Jesus. Heaven isn't great because the roads are gold. It's great because we'll be in the presence of Jesus. He is our prize. He is the one who calls us and are called to. He gives us faith and sustains our faith. Lord, let us worship you greatly today because your gospel is powerful. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.